On this edition of Independent Sources, the mean streets of New York, the growing concern about the city's alarming rate of pedestrian deaths.
It is every kind of person, every borough, cyclist, passenger, pedestrian, people standing on the sidewalk.
And New York State's language barrier, why the state isn't keeping up with a growing demand for ESL classes.
Funding has stayed really pretty steady in over 10 years, while the immigrant population and people who speak English less than very well, those populations have grown tremendously across the state.
Those stories and more coming up on Independent Sources. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. Here's a startling fact. Some observers estimate that more pedestrians will be killed by cars than people murdered in New York City this year. Last year, more than 140 pedestrians were killed, 160th the year before that. These deaths have prompted Mayor Bill de Blasio to initiate the Vision Zero policy, as well as lower the city's speed limit to 25 miles per hour. But are those steps enough? I spoke with WNYC producer Kat Aaron about this underreported issue. Kat, before we start the conversation, I really want to tell you how much I enjoy reading the series. I mean, really, really well done with the multimedia components to it. Really, really good job.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Can you tell us about the genesis of this project?
Well, it was actually before the mayor launched his Vision Zero program. At the beginning of 2014, our editor, Andrea Bernstein, said, you know, we really need to focus our attention on people being killed by cars in New York City, by vehicles. Partly because when someone dies in a plane crash or a train crash, there's all this reaction and attention and effort to figure out what happened and what went wrong and how to stop it next time. And with a traffic death, it's really sort of, you know, oh, it's terrible, but what can we do? And so as a newsroom, we wanted to explore that. And then it wound up coinciding with Mayor de Blasio's Vision Zero initiative, and it fortuitously, the sort of reporting and policy wound up aligning.
Mm-hmm. And the other component of the story is there is a dispute about exactly how many people die each year from car accidents. Why is that?
Well, it depends a little bit on who you ask and what numbers you're looking at. WNYC kept a very close count of all of the people who were killed in vehicle collisions last year. We included everyone who was killed in an incident that involved a car or another kind of sort of motorized vehicle. The city includes people who were killed everywhere except people who died in a parking lot, for example, or on private property. The state counts those people, but doesn't count people who die of their injuries 30 days after the crash. So sort of these very fine detail questions about who counts and who doesn't. At WNYC, we counted everyone. And so the mayor said that this was the year with the lowest pedestrian fatalities on record since the city started counting. By WNYC's count, it maybe wasn't the absolute lowest year ever, although it certainly was a drop from 2013.
Well, so far, I mean, his policy we haven't felt the effect of the policy yet, have we?
I think that is debatable. I think that you do see, I would say that I think people are driving a little bit more slowly, partly because of the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit and partly because of the increasing number of speed cameras that you have around the city. I do think that the road redesigns that you've seen around the city, the slow zones, the sort of shifting intersections, have had some impact. And the city talks a lot about 3 E's: education, enforcement, and engineering. I think education is in some ways going to be the one that takes longest to take hold, but maybe the one that has the longest impact.
Is Mayor de Blasio trying to build on the work started by Mayor Bloomberg?
I would say that, yes. I think the Mayor de Blasio is building on sort of the legacy of Mayor Bloomberg and his Transportation Commissioner, Janet Sadiq-Khan, and that the shift that has happened under de Blasio and the Department of Transportation Commissioner, Polly Trottenberg, has really been the emphasis on reducing traffic deaths. I think Bloomberg did a lot of road redesign, brought up a lot of bike lanes with great controversy in some places, but I think that de Blasio has really focused on eliminating traffic deaths ultimately is the projected goal by 2024.
Tell us a little bit more details about de Blasio's policy, its effectiveness, and what are the layers of this besides just reducing speed limit and having cameras to stop people who are speeding over the limit?
Well, the Department of Transportation Commissioner talks a lot about, as I said, the 3 E's, engineering, enforcement, and education. That enforcement obviously is mostly going to be on the NYPD. That's sort of increasing traffic tickets for the most dangerous driving offenses. So running red lights, not yielding to pedestrians, sort of dangerous left turns, cell phone use while you're driving, speeding. So those are the things that the city's police officers are writing more tickets on. We've done a lot of documentation of that at WNYC. And then again, the speed cameras, right now there are about 30 or 35 up around the city, but the city has authorization to put in as many as 140. So there could be many more speed cameras coming to the 5 boroughs. And then engineering, they've created slow zones in some parts. They're tackling Queens Boulevard, which has long been a problem.
Boulevard of death, we used to call it.
Yeah, and the number of deaths has dropped precipitously with some of the changes that have happened in recent years, but the city, I think, is really going to be taking that on. And then education. I mean, you see in the taxis that there's Vision Zero on the little screen, and many of the taxis now have bumper stickers talking about Vision Zero. And I think the concept of traffic fatalities and the issue of it as something that both drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, passengers, everyone should be aware of, I think is gaining ground. I mean, you hear people talking about it, and sort of I think the more people are aware of traffic death, people's behavior changes.
You guys posted, WNYC, you posted the human toll of this, because we can talk about this fatality, but talk to us about the human impact of this issue.
Well, I covered this issue very closely for all of 2014, and in the course of that year, 265 people were killed by vehicles in the city. And I think about these people all the time. On New Year's Eve, when I was sort of celebrating with my family, I was thinking about all of the people who are starting 2015 without their loved one. And it is every kind of New Yorker. You have native New Yorkers, recent immigrants, young, old. We saw a lot of seniors, and not as many children, actually, as I had anticipated. There were 13 children killed last year, although obviously 13 too many. But it is every kind of person, every borough, cyclist, passenger, pedestrian, people standing on the sidewalk, people driving down the highway. Yeah, it's every kind of person. And it, for all of us who spent the year reporting on it, I hold my son's hand really tightly when we are anywhere near a street, and I think it's changed all of our behavior, too.
Well, great work. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Still to come on the show, New York State's language problem. Before that, Crystal Lowe has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. Myungu Kang, a 57-year-old Korean immigrant who lives in Bayside, Queens, is running from Los Angeles to New York, hoping for a peaceful reunification between South and North Korea. The Korea Times reports that Kang will run 3,150 miles on his own for 120 days with a poster asking for Korean reunification. His marathon began in Huntington Beach in Orange County on February 1st. His route would take him through Flagstaff, Arizona, Oklahoma City, Nashville, Tennessee, and finally New York. Kang says he was inspired by Yi Jo Kwon, a retired Queens businessman who succeeded in making his coast-to-coast trek in 2010 to raise awareness about diabetes. The Jewish Daily Forward interviewed David Shulman of Etchler's Judaica store in Brooklyn on the growing market for yarmulkes. Shulman explains that the term yarmulke derives from Yari Malka, meaning fear of God. Wearing the yarmulke serves as a symbolical and tangible reminder in the Jewish religion that God is above. Size, material, design, and color are all factors that are taken into consideration when someone purchases a yarmulke. There are subtle yet significant distinctions in the cut and the rim that are typically dictated by the communal or family traditions. In addition to listing distinctions in yarmulkes and their importance to various Jewish denominations, the article also explores how the yarmulke market has grown exponentially in the 21st century. In fact, in recent years, more and more women are actually wearing and purchasing yarmulkes as well. Voices of New York featured a new exhibit at the Weeksville Heritage Center in Brooklyn titled After Afropolitan. The exhibit includes work by numerous artists from the global African diaspora. The term Afropolitan is used to describe the lifestyles of Africans living outside of Africa. The pieces range from canvases to sculptures to audiovisual displays. Workshops, panel discussions, and performances will also be a part of the exhibit. After Afropolitan is a joint effort between the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, Afropop Worldwide, and the Weeksville Heritage Center. The exhibit will run until March 6th. Photography students at LaGuardia Community College have come together to create an exhibit highlighting the various life experiences of Muslims in America. The project is titled Faces of Islam and features Muslims from all different walks of life, ranging from politicians to students, activists, and royalty. LaGuardia's Alexandra Ben Othman says, when selecting her subjects, her first instinct was to reach out to those groups who people wouldn't necessarily think of as Muslim. Ben Othman and her classmates' work will be on display at the Queens Museum until March 1st. And finally, Caribbean Life reports on the fight to preserve the Rennie, the first Black-owned theater in Harlem. William H. Roach, Cleophas Charity, and Joseph Sweeney built the complex in 1924. It served as a home for the Harlem Renaissance and the Black community at a time when Blacks had no place to meet, dance, celebrate, or entertain. Unfortunately, the building closed in 1979. Since then, activists have been fighting to keep the complex and its memory alive. Recently, the Abyssinian Development Corporation sold the building to BRP Development Corporation for $15 million. The developers promised a $70 million housing unit they plan to name the Rennie. However, cultural preservationists such as Michael Henry Adams believe the community should rally to protect the space. As of now, the Department of Buildings is still reviewing the plans and is yet to confirm the future of the historic site. Those are just a few headlines from the city's ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be right back.
Thanks for staying tuned. A recent report from the Center for an Urban Future shows that New York State is failing to keep up with an increasing demand for English as a second language classes. That demand is being driven by the nearly 400,000 immigrants who have moved to the state between 2008 and 2013. I sat down with the center's research director, David Giles, to talk about some of the report's findings. David, why are there fewer classes for immigrants who really need these English language classes?
You know, over the years, the funding for English language services and English language classes across the state has remained pretty steady. We haven't seen a big drop in funding, but in 2005, 2006, the state started, I think, spending more time per student in their classes. I think the seats dropped for that reason. But in our report, the big takeaway I think we're trying to document there is the fact that funding has stayed really pretty steady in over 10 years while the immigrant population and people who speak English less than very well, those populations have grown tremendously across the state.
And how, was the state caught off guard? I mean, didn't the powers that be realize we have a situation here we need to address? I mean, how come no one saw this problem?
I think at the state level, the state government level, I think people are not quite seeing the role that immigrants are playing across the state. I think people understand very well that New York City is a huge magnet for immigrants, and immigrants play a big role in the economy here. But I think people understand less well that increasingly immigrants are playing a very important role in economies across the state. Erie County, Albany County, Syracuse, Rochester, Nassau, and Suffolk County have all seen huge increases in their immigrant populations. In some cases, the native-born populations have been decreasing. So these places would be seeing a decrease in residents if it weren't for the immigrants coming in and really filling up the cities and starting businesses and taking jobs. So it's a big trend and an important one.
Do they need to change a formula for ESL classes? Because from what I understand, according to your report, now more resources is put in more affluent neighborhoods where, frankly, a lot of people don't need these classes, but not enough resources are allocated for poorer neighborhoods and sometimes where a lot of the immigrants end up living. Is this something that the state is taking a look at and reallocating resources?
I think the state probably does need to look at the way funds are allocated for English language classes. But I think maybe the bigger, even more important issue is to begin thinking about increasing funds, because we're seeing, again, a big increase in the people who need these classes. I think the rationale for investing in English language classes is very strong. Immigrants could play an even more and bigger role in the economy if they could integrate better in the workforce. So yes, I think there are some issues around how the funds get distributed from county to county, but the bigger issue for me really is the lack of funding and the lack of any increase in funding over the last decade or more.
For the most part, we're talking about adult classes, not the regular school.
Yeah, this is all adult, 18 and over, so that's right.
Is this approach, more effective than, trying to reach a larger population? Because it seems like the state's idea is, okay, let's just let them learn English on their own, and this is not working out very well, is it?
Well, I think school children, the way the funds are distributed in that case is different. That comes from a different place, and I think schools across the state are investing in English language classes for their children. That's happening. But it's not happening as much on the adult side. And adults who come here to take up jobs and start businesses also contribute enormously to the economy. And I think more attention needs to be put on what adults need in terms of English language services, for sure.
Is there an effort to increase the funding for these projects?
Sure, there's been an effort. There are people, I think, who really see the value in immigrants and the role that immigrants play and the value that English language classes play in economies across the state. But it's never a high priority, I don't think, and I think it should be a higher priority. We're entering the budget season now with the state government and the city government, and I think this issue should be on the table for sure.
And so how is that impacting immigrants' ability to out the state to get a job and really assimilate?
Well, when you can't speak English, it's tough. I mean, it's really hard. It limits drastically the type and number of jobs that you can take. When you start a business, I think you see a lot of immigrants in New York City for sure, a lot of immigrants who don't speak English. They nevertheless find a way to start a business, but they could do better without question if they could speak English.
What can the state learn from the city in this issue?
I think that cities across the state can learn a lot from New York City. We've done a lot to invest in business services for immigrants. We've done a lot more in terms of reaching out to immigrants for tax preparation purposes and other things. We do some additional funding for adult education for immigrants as well. But the vast majority of funds comes from the state and from the federal governments, and I don't think there's been a whole lot of attention paid to it at either of those levels of government.
Are you guys making recommendations to the state on this topic? I mean, you did the research, but do you have some kind of recommendations that they should follow?
I think our big recommendation is in the upcoming budget season to really look at the trends across the state where immigrants are growing, to take a look at the role these people play in local economies, and to look at really investing more in their ability to integrate in the economy.
David Giles, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
When we come back, immortalizing an artist who fought for civil and women's rights. Finally from us, the artist Benny Andrews has been described as a man who made a big impact without ever becoming a household name. A new book titled, Draw What You See, seeks to pay homage to Andrews by using his own work to tell his life story. Zyphus Lebrun spoke to the book's author, Kathleen Benson.
Kathy Benson, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the book, Draw What You See. It's all about Benny Andrews. So let's just start with, well, who was Benny Andrews?
He was an artist of considerable renown. He was born in 1930 in Georgia, outside of Madison, to a sharecropping family, one of 10 children. And when he was growing up, he decided that he didn't really want to be a sharecropper all his life, and that there must be a bigger world, and he was determined to see it. And he did things that were fairly unusual for a child in his circumstances at that time. That he actually persuaded his mother, she didn't need that much persuading, to allow him to go to high school. Very few black children went to high school in those days because they were needed in the fields. So he went to high school. He got a 4-H scholarship to go to Fort Valley College, I believe it was, and then he went into the Air Force. And after that, on the GI Bill, he went to the Chicago Arts Institute. Mm-hmm. And he studied art there. When most of his fellow students were working in abstraction, he decided he was a people's painter and wanted to depict people. And he actually started, at that time, he started working with collage also. And then he moved to New York City and just became better and better known. Taught at Queens College for many years and started a very significant program where he took his students to local prisons to teach art. He was the visual arts head at the National Endowment for the Arts for 2 years, and during that time he worked very hard to, and in fact had done in the late 60s, early 70s also, for equity for women and artists of color in museums and galleries. And he got more and more famous, did a variety of topics. I think the ones that I can think of offhand that really mean something to me, they resonate, are the migration series. He was talking about migrations of, the Okies and the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears. And he had, of course, done his own migrations. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned the fact that he was instrumental in addressing certain issues with minorities and women. Talk a little bit more about that. How so? How was he able to help minorities and women in art in particular at the time?
Well, he organized protests. He was the founder of an organization that whose mission was to seek equity for artists and women of color, and they demonstrated. They picketed outside major museums. They got on TV. They wrote articles, and it was a fairly significant movement. I remember it. I was very new to the museum world at that time, and I can remember meeting with a group. I don't know if Benny was among them or not. I was too nervous, really. I can remember somehow being appointed not the spokesperson for the museum, but the listener for the museum. Mm-hmm. And I can remember the protests and the pickets. Yeah.
So why did you decide at this point to put this book together?
Well, Benny had illustrated my late husband, Jim Haskins, and my last 2 books. And I met him because of that, because he was the illustrator. And after Benny passed away, the original packager, her name is Janice Shea, and she has a Pinafore Press, and she's in Savannah, Georgia. She and I had become good friends, and she suggested that I do Benny's biography, and that it be illustrated with his paintings and collages. And Janice introduced me to Neen Humphrey, who is Benny's widow, and we all worked together. And this book is the result. Mm-hmm.
Now, who are you targeting with this book here? Is it young people, or is it run the gamut?
Well, it's suggested for 4 to 8-year-olds in terms of the text, but it really can reach a much wider audience than that. Mm-hmm. I've had adult friends who read it 3 times and really liked especially the social justice angle.
Right, and that's the next point that I was coming to, this whole idea of social justice, which is kind of underlying a lot of what he had done. Mm-hmm. Do you think it will resonate with a younger audience?
I think maybe the time has come. I think this book may have hit just the right part of the curve in terms of the interest in social justice. Not that the interest has ever gone away completely, but I do think there's a time and place for everything, and this may be one of the times for paying greater attention to social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you hope that perhaps this book could be part of eventually maybe form part of a curriculum of some sorts? Do you have those kinds of ambitions for the book?
I think it would be wonderful if it did. But it can be used just for what the title says, draw what you see. That's what he encouraged. In fact, the first spread is about how he went down to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and worked with children who had been displaced, whom he considered migrants of another kind, and encouraging them to just express their feelings through drawing and writing postcards. He had them send him postcards. And that is sometimes the best way to engage the world and to express your place in the world is by drawing or writing.
All right, well, Kathy Benson, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
The book, Draw What You See, is available online and in bookstores. That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.